Halifax was a quiet little city in the early 20th century, with the harbor used by many shipping companies. Once the conflict in Europe had started, the small city became a military hotbed. The population sprung up by a few thousand in mere weeks. Some convoys, with many necessary supplies for the Allies, were organized. Some supplies were also going to be used for relief in war-torn European countries. All the peace and quiet ended on December 6, 1917. The French cargo ship, the slow 320-foot, 44.8 feet wide SS Mont Blanc, was traveling up to Halifax from New York full of a shipment of explosives. The ship was to catch a convoy that was bound for Europe. However, it got delayed in New York and did not make it to Halifax before the anti-subnets were put out. This is what the anti-subnet would have looked like. So as a result, the Mont Blanc had to wait outside the harbor overnight. The next morning, the Mont Blanc was allowed entry right away. At the same time, the SS Imo was allowed to exit the port. The Imo was a cargo ship that was chartered by the Commission for Relief in Belgium. The Imo was 430 feet long and 45 feet wide. It could hold up to 40 crew members. Because of the setup of her propellers and hull, she was very difficult to maneuver. The Imo needed to get down to New York to pick up some more supplies. It got held up overnight because of the fuel being delivered late. Due to heavy traffic in the harbor entrance, the Imo was forced to travel in the wrong lane. The port speed limit was only 5 knots, but the Imo was at 7 knots. Coming in the opposite direction, the Mont Blanc had spotted the Imo in its lane. The two ships exchanged horn blasts to indicate positioning, but the Imo would not give up its lane. Finally, the collision happened. The Imo, after indicating it was going to reverse, slammed nearly 9 feet into the Mont Blanc's hull. There were metal drums on the deck of the Mont Blanc that were torn loose in the impact. The drums contained liquid benzene, which spilled over the deck and leaked into the forward hold. In an attempt to avoid any further damage, the Imo reversed. This caused sparks to fly and ignite the fire on the Mont Blanc. All these events occurred at around 8:45 in the morning. The Mont Blanc's engines were stopped, but it had enough forward motion to drift toward Pier 6 on the Halifax side of the harbor. Workers all around the harbor, residents in nearby Richmond, and children walking to school all stopped to look at the burning ship. None of these people were aware of the danger. The Mont Blanc's crew neglected to have the red flag raised, indicating that it was carrying high explosives. The red flag was required to be up when the ship carries such cargo. On the Mont Blanc, the crew was attempting to put out the raging inferno, but just didn't have the right tools to fight a benzene fire. The captain ordered them to abandon ship. The 40 crew left in 2 rowboats in the direction of the Dartmouth shore. As the unmanned Mont Blanc drifted toward Pier 6, many were not aware that there were war materials that could catch fire as soon as the ship hit the wooden pier. Mont Blanc burned for 15 minutes before the first fire alarm was sounded in Halifax. Halifax at the time had only 1 motorized fire engine. Right after the collision, the tugboat Stella Maris was in the area, so it pulled up alongside the burning ship and started spraying it with a fire hose. There were many other vessels in and around the port that came in to help. The HMS Highflyer, for example, sent a large rowboat and 7 crew to help the Stella Maris. A Canadian training ship, the HMCS Niobe, also sent a supply boat and sailors to help move the Mont Blanc. About 20 minutes after the ship caught fire, the Mont Blanc exploded. The rising cloud of smoke and debris was seen by the USS von Steuben over 80 kilometers away. The explosion was the biggest in recorded history at the time. The shockwaves could be felt as far away as Prince Edward Island. All buildings in a 2 square kilometer area were obliterated. Around 2,000 people were killed and another 9,000 injured. Many people were permanently blinded due to flying glass and debris. About 6,000 people were homeless, and another 12,000 houses were damaged. The aftermath was terrible. Halifax was decimated in seconds. The communities of Dartmouth and Richmond were also reduced to rubble. The HMS Knight Templar and the HMS Changuinola, which were near the harbor, helped with the rescue effort. They both sent out a medical crew to tend to the wounded. The Stella Maris was about to start pulling the Mont Blanc away from the city when it exploded. After the explosion, the Stella Maris was sent flying, and 19 of her crew were killed, while 15 were lucky enough to survive. As for the tugboat itself, it only suffered a broken smokestack and other minor damages. People on shore immediately began to help those in need. Buildings that were not damaged in Halifax and Dartmouth were used as hospitals. Doctors and nurses came from other parts of Nova Scotia. As soon as trains and ships were able to get to Halifax, help came from other parts of Nova Scotia, Canada, and the U.S. A special relief train came from New York City with 600 workers, $15,000 worth of tools, $150,000 worth of lumber, and 1,000 portable houses and 25 trucks. Salvage workers and expert engineers were also on the train. The investigation to what caused the explosion started with many people believing that the Germans had bombed the city. Johann Johansen, the helmsman on the Emo, was arrested at an American hospital under the suspicion of him being German. All German residents in Halifax were arrested and imprisoned until the true cause of the explosion was revealed. Afterward, they were all released. Originally, the captain of the Mont Blanc, Aimé Lemedec, the harbor pilot, Francis Mackey, and Royal Canadian Navy officer Frederick Wyatt were blamed for the collision. All three were charged with manslaughter. However, the charges on Mackey and Lemedec were dropped because they were considered excessive. The captain and the pilot on the Emo both died in the explosion, so no charges were laid on them. The inquiry eventually found that the Emo and the Mont Blanc were both equally at blame for the errors that led to the explosion. In 1985, a monument was finally built on the top of Fort Needham to honor those who died on December 6, 1917. This monument was dedicated in June of 1985, more than 68 years after the explosion. Every December 6th, a service is held in memory of those who died or whose lives would never be the same.